welcome Coalesce.ai.
Good evening, everybody. My name's Greg Woolf, founder and CEO of Coalesce AI. Thanks so much for having us here tonight. So what we're doing with AI is we're automating surveillance and monitoring in financial services firms. And the problem here is that the financial services industry is highly regulated and spends a huge amount of money, an inordinate amount of money, complying with regulations. $75 billion a year, and even the non-compliance is $20 billion a year, and these costs have doubled over the last 5 years, amounting to 10 to 20% of operating costs for some institutions. And the reason for this is essentially pressure from regulators, right? The regulators want to see better control of the financial markets and folks around fraud and costs are spiraling out of control, risky practices, getting it wrong can cost. I think US Bank was fined $600 million for non-compliance for an incident last year. But mostly it's around inefficient workflows. Tedious manual workflows that get done every day in a financial services firm in the middle and back office. This type of technology, this is the kind of technology that is readily automatable through AI. So initially we started out using AI to automate the higher decision-making theses in an organization like investment research. But what we found was that this technology is actually better used on the simple decision-making. So a lot of folks are using AI to essentially find the needle in the haystack. So let's say they're looking for a fraud detection, right? In order to teach a piece of software to be able to identify the needle in the haystack, you have to give it copious amounts of data. You have to give it tons and tons of examples of what is fraud and what is not fraud. And what we found was when we started talking to our customers was, in fact, the pain was not identifying the needle in the haystack. The problem was the haystack was just too big. Right? There's a lot of false positives, and people sitting in their jobs 99 out of 100 times getting false positives saying, this is not it, this is not it, this is not it. Ah, there's one I should look at. So we inverted the paradigm. Instead of trying to find the needle in the haystack, we shrink the haystack. And it's a lot easier for our software to learn how to automate away the simple tasks, the stuff that's patently, definitely straw, and leave behind what's much better for a human being to interpret. So we're a team. We're some very fortunate to have some very smart and experienced people on our team. Our VP Operations was Chief Compliance Officer at a local hedge fund for about 11 years. We're a talented head of engineering. And on our advisory board, Chuck Senator actually runs the Boston RegTech group. He's a member of our advisory board, former director of the SEC, and he now runs risk and compliance at one of Fidelity's groups. So a couple of use cases for you. We're particularly good at natural language processing. The AI is particularly good at being able to read a lot of text and filter that down to meaningful text. So for instance, like reviewing e-communications, social media, email surveillance, etc. Fraud prevention, we're working with 3 different banks. They're collaborating in terms of how they detect certain types of consumer loan fraud. And negative news analysis, AML, KYC, and even just portfolio risk, looking for bad things in companies that companies work with. I'll skip a little bit through this. We run an AI think tank here in Boston. About a year and a half ago, we started an initiative to explore how this technology could be used in large financial services firms. And we're working with, as you can see, some of the top firms in Boston, as well as some former regulators from the OCC, the SEC, and the Federal Reserve Bank, exploring how this technology can actually be used for the betterment of financial regulation. So a quick demo over here. I'll let this run in the background. And essentially what we're doing here is you can see the product is going through and looking for, in this case, email surveillance. It's looking at a number of different predefined categories. Our IP, our technology allows the business user to tell the system exactly what they're looking for. We say it's akin to hiring an army of interns, teaching them how to do a lot of that repetitive, tedious work. And it's going through these emails and it's looking for potential flags of problems, either fraud or potential flags of complaints or even opportunity. And it's highlighting them with a confidence score in terms of what it's matching. And then based on that, it's bubbling that up to the user so that they can make a decision. There's a bunch of filters that people can put in place to determine how to filter that information. And we also have a workflow engine built in here, so that makes it really easy for us to sit on top of an existing infrastructure at a large bank or asset manager, plug and play, take the data out of their system, and then have the users configure it for AI analysis of their type of their workflows. So I think that's about it. I'm out of time, so please, any questions? Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was, how does our type of solution help with illegal money laundering or AML, anti-money laundering? So we spent a fair amount of time with our think tank discussing how this type of technology can be used around AML. It is a real problem in the industry. You hit on a really good theme here. More than $8 billion a year is spent on anti-money laundering. I'd like to kind of put that under the umbrella of BSA, Bank and Secrecy Act, which is kind of the overall umbrella for money laundering, financial fraud, financial crimes, really the worst things that people are doing out there. And the problem is that banks are required to file types of reports called SARs, SARs. Anybody heard of an SAR? Anybody know what that is? Okay. So that's called a suspicious activity report. So when something happens at a bank, they're required. Essentially what's happened is the regulators and the government have pushed down the fight against financial crime, the front lines of that fight, to the financial institutions. And with the financial institutions, they don't want to get caught, they don't want to get fined, they don't want to get penalized for not filling out the appropriate forms. So what they're doing is they're doing something they call filing defensive SARs. So that what they're essentially filling out tons and tons of paperwork and reports around these potential suspicious transactions, and then they file them off to an organization called FinCEN. Anybody ever heard of FinCEN? Yep, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, who then provides a database of all this information for the FBI, who take that information and ultimately, if they're going to prosecute, they hand it over to the DA's office. By the way, I was at an ACAMS conference the other day. I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's a money laundering type of conference. And one of the folks on the panel actually works with the DA's office in Connecticut, and they said that on a monthly basis, whenever a SAR is filed on a Connecticut resident, right, they get notified and they have to have their team review the paperwork, right, and the facts around the circumstances, decide whether to notify the FBI and prosecute, etc. Take a guess as to how many pages per month is assigned to an individual in the DA's office over there in terms of being able to analyze potential risk. Anybody, throw out a number.
5,000.
Pages per person per month. 3,000. Close. 3,000 pages of narrative. Right? Every person in that office has to read every month. So this kind of technology, and so to answer your question, I'm running out of time, but to answer your question, the problem is the defensive SARs. They are essentially, the banks are filing SARs on everything that's vaguely suspicious, and it's not effective. Less than 0.5% of the transactions, suspicious transactions, are actually caught. Right? And the ability, if we can take this technology and slim down the amount of work that we're handing over to the regulators, making the operating cost for running a bank 10 to 20%, a lot of that compliance cost is around AML. If we can slim that down and make a higher quality level of information to the financial regulators and then to the enforcement, that's going to help the entire industry. And as a side note, we actually were invited through our think tank to propose some questions recently in the Senate Banking Committee hearing with the FinCEN, the U.S. Treasury, the FBI, and the head of the OCC, which is the governing regulatory agency for the banking industry. They asked us to pose some questions in terms of how AI can be used to streamline and automate this process. And we were fortunate enough that our questions were actually picked up by Senator Mark Warner, who's not only on the Senate Banking Committee, but he's also the Vice Chair of the Intelligence Committee. And he actually spent 2 minutes asking questions about how AI could be used to benefit the industry. So I think you hit on a really good topic there, and that is something that we're hoping is our mission to be able to help. Follow-up question. All right, anybody else have a question before I do a follow-up? All right, go ahead. Great question. So data privacy. I actually spoke at an MIT Enterprise Forum event in this building. I won't say where because I was another law firm. Earlier this month on data privacy. And the trick with AI, one thing about AI, and I agree with you, that is a concern. What AI can do is it can obfuscate that data, right? So we're not putting a massive honeypot of data up in the sky for the hackers to go after. Right? But what AI can do is we can teach the system to identify the patterns and look for the patterns of financial crime without having to divulge the actual underlying data points underneath it. So data privacy is a really good question. Sorry, sir, question.
Yeah, is this a standalone tool? Like, does it integrate with any SIMs and with other programs like user activity monitoring specifically to the users in the company? How does this differentiate between that?
Sorry, what? So is this a standalone program that integrates with SIMs?
Well, it integrates.
What is a SIM?
A SIM, like it's an event management tool that a lot of companies use, which creates this haystack.
Got it. Understood. Yeah. No, it's definitely, as I said, we have that workflow engine which allows our product to sit on top of existing solutions. Whether it's an email archiving system, a trading system, a loan application system, a credit reporting system. Absolutely, it needs to take the knowledge that's already in the organization, extract that information, and then take it to the high level by applying AI to automate out the simple tasks, so that what we're left behind is human augmented decision making. Question?
Great.
All right, I'm up. One more? No more. Okay. Unfortunately, I have to leave. I have to go pick up a kid, but please, by all means, if you have more questions for me, connect with me on LinkedIn, gwolf at coalesce.ai, and I'd be happy to answer your questions afterwards. Thanks very much for the opportunity.